Hi, this is Sam Moes. I'm a second year returner in Sadler Hall this year. So, as a returner this past year, I've found that a leadership role among my staff came naturally. Even during my evaluation, my RDMR pointed out how my laid-back attitude and various concerns that I've voiced during meetings have been beneficial to the staff. Also, I think it's typical for returners to lead during the beginning of the year, simply because we have the experience of 1 or 2 years as an RA. So I've now, after 2 years, seen a variety of situations and have a firm grasp on protocol. Passing this knowledge on to new RAs is one of the most important roles a returner holds, I think. It also, even things like managing the main desk or on-call protocol, those are all things that we go over during training, and it's easy to read about in the manual, but it really, watching someone do it, typically a returner, helps cement that knowledge in a new RA's mind. So I really think that a leadership role among returners is natural, and is probably the most important role that they hold on their staff. And then as far as supporting the Office of Residence Life, I like to explain the reasoning. I like to do this, I should say, by explaining the reasoning behind different tasks to the new RAs. So, for example, I remember during my first summer training, a few tasks or different trainings seemed just repetitive, or I didn't understand why we were doing this. And it was only after I had that experience the first year as an RA that I realized, for example, how important BCDs are. Getting that practical experience and that practice in handling different situations in that role-playing setting, how valuable that can be. So something that I tried to do this year was pass that on and just say, look, I know that it seems long, this training, but it really is very important. And so I like to support ORL in that way by highlighting the importance of even the most mundane training sessions. So I think it's important to shift the way you're intentionally interacting or connecting on residents based on the population, and even more specifically based on their individual identities. So even in a population of all first-year students that I've been in the last 2 years, first with Flint and now with Sadler, every interaction is different. So there's no single set strategy that's going to work for every resident in a specific population. That being said, there are obviously similarities among all the residents based on their population. So for a first-year floor, I'm always... One of the reasons that I want to be an RA is the transition period that first-year students go through. So that's something that I like to talk about in my intentional interactions or intentional connections now. I like to talk about, transitioning from high school to college, and a lot are coming from far away. I moved here from Southern California, which was kind of a rough transition, so I can relate to residents and new students that are going through that. And I use that strategy in those intentional interactions, especially in the beginning of the year when a lot of students are feeling homesick, or, they haven't made many friends yet, and kind of, they're finding their place, essentially. With a mixed population, so ideally, for these interactions, I would be aware of the, year of the student that I'm speaking to. And then I can, talk, if they're an upperclassman, about their transition out of college, or, finance-focused things like jobs on campus, or any of their higher division major focus classes. And then with underclassmen, the conversations will be similar to those first-year students. Now, if I didn't say it's, the beginning of the year, and I don't know what year each individual resident is at yet, I think that's a great way to just start a conversation about something academic based. So I can say, remind me what year you were, and then we can launch into, I had a tough time picking my major too. I was undecided, or whatever it may be. So using kind of that as a step, because they'll recognize that in a mixed population, it's not unusual for the RA to be asking about their class year. And then upper division populations, as I mentioned, are typically going to be more focused on the next steps. So they're transitioning out of college into either, the real world or into grad school. And while that's not universally true, as we could see some transfer students, it's a general trend that they're going to be, more focused on the next few years of their class, and they won't really be as worried about finding where the best dining hall is or getting lost on their way to class. So in that way, you can tailor those interactions based on the population. However, I really do highlight the individuality of the intentional interactions. They really, you can't have the same conversation with every person, and so really tailoring it to that specific student, and that comes with learning who your residents are and interacting with them throughout the year. But I think that that's the best approach to take. So in the last year, I feel that my understanding of topics surrounding diversity and inclusion has vastly improved, even more so than it did when I took care a year and a half ago. So I think that this improvement came because of various conversations that I had with people, both staff members and residents this year, actually. Last year I had a wonderful, it wasn't wonderful at the time. It was, it was stressful and I didn't know how to act, but I broke down this interaction with my direct supervisor, and we talked about learning and the process and what I could have done better and what I did well in this, it was a bias-related incident, but that I learned a lot. And then even, for example, so this year I had a conversation with one of my staff members about white privilege. And I've always viewed that in the macro sense, in that I've looked at the empirical data surrounding it and, how the economic ramifications of white privilege, but they really pushed me to see how does it impact people on that individual level. What does it really look like? And that was a struggle for me, breaking out of that macroeconomic view of the world. But it's something that I think really propelled my growth. And I love conversations like that. They shift the way that I view certain issues, and I always want to continue, my personal growth, especially in this area, through these conversations. I've always enjoyed having discussions with people who have different views than me or different backgrounds, and so that's something that I'm never going to stop engaging in. So I'm sure that I'll continue to grow in this area, even as much as I already have, not only throughout my tenure as an RA, but into the future as well. As far as changes, I went through a big change last year as an RA. I moved from Flint, where I lived my freshman year, as well, to Sadler, and joined a staff that, as an honors LC heavy staff, a lot of them already had close relationships. And I moved in knowing, no one on the staff. So it was a tough transition, but I really enjoy change, and I think that change is very necessary for personal growth. So it didn't bother me too much, and I transitioned into this new staff really nicely. I made my own relationships. I also went through a lot of change, like I mentioned earlier, moving to Syracuse from Southern California. So I'm very familiar with that shift in culture and, different people, even, the different culture in Sadler Hall versus in Flint Hall. So as far as strategies, one strategy that I often employ is resisting making judgments until I've gathered all the information available to me. So, for example, this past year, I didn't immediately judge any of my new staff members and say, oh, I'm going to be best friends with this person, or I know I'm not going to get along with that person. I really held off as long as I could and, gathered all the information and had deep, engaging conversations with everyone. And I feel I'm very lucky because I'm part of a staff that's very close. Even at this point in the second semester, we still, hang out, and there's no bad relationships among any of us. So I think that had we all rushed to judgment during that first week of training, we might not have formed these bonds. And the same applies to senior staff or even a new building location. Another strategy that I use is to be as positive as possible with change. So even if a situation seems unfortunate, and I'll use the location of the building as an example. So I was initially upset that Sadler is pretty far from the women's building where I like to work out every day. But, I put myself in the mindset that I'm going to enjoy this walk. And I do enjoy the long walk, listening to music or gathering my thoughts before the gym. And despite being, a little out of the way, it's something that I really enjoy. And that positive mindset, I know, helped me reach that conclusion. It's also close to the dome, which is great. And then a final strategy that I'll use a lot is trying to be as prepared as possible for the change. So, for example, in the past, I've talked very early in the year with my supervisor about their management styles and finding out, are you more hands-on or hands-off? What kind of criticism do you use, or is it very positive reinforcement based? And really in that discussion talking about how I like to be managed, and my style that I that I prefer. So using all of those strategies, I think, makes change go as smoothly as possible, and it's something that I try to do often. And then as far as conflicts, I've encountered a lot of conflicts during my 2 years, but probably the one that sticks out the most is from my first year as an RA during the spring semester. So without sharing too much personal information, as I want to remain confidential, there was a roommate conflict that actually had turned into sort of a suicide ideation situation, and I had to address both the disagreement among the roommates and also, obviously that pressing issue of there is suicide ideation going on. So we addressed the suicide ideation by, I worked with senior staff and outside offices and talked with the student. And then only after that was resolved did we revisit the actual roommate conflict that brought this all to my attention in the first place. And I'm really proud of this mediation, because even today I see on Instagram that these two roommates, they're very close now. And I think that it actually brought them closer. So I'm really proud of the way that it turned out, but there's always room for improvement. And I definitely, looking back, if I had a chance to handle it differently, I probably would have approached the second roommate more gently, to say. So I think that I may have been abrupt, and I would definitely do my chance to, for lack of a better word, be more smooth in the way that the conversation was initiated. But regardless, from this experience, I really did learn a lot. I learned how to balance two distinct but still intertwined issues, and really better mediate conflicts. And there's still, I'll see roommate conflicts all the time, and this was kind of my foray into that realm, and it's something that we always have to handle as RAs, and we do the best we can. And I really think that it helped me grow as an RA. All right, thank you very much.